Good evening, welcome to Viewpoint. I'm Zaka Jacob. Sri Lanka's embattled President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has fled to the Maldives in the early hours of today. Before going, he made Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe as the acting president. But that has not gone down well, with tens of thousands of Aragalaya protesters who then stormed the Prime Minister's office and laid siege to it. What they want is a clean break from the past. What they want is a new system to replace the old. They see both the Rajapaksas as well as Ranil as being hand in glove. The question that's being asked of a country, a tiny island nation which has been through a lot over the last many years, from the civil war to the tsunami to, of course, now this massive peaceful protest, which for the first time in South Asia is potentially displacing an elected government that is in power. Let me bring you up to speed with the story of the day so far in Sri Lanka.
It was always expected to be a day full of chaos in the history of the island nation, with President Gotabaya all set to resign officially. But what people of Sri Lanka received was a message from the speaker that he hasn't got the resignation yet and is hoping to get it in the next 24 hours. What emerged next was that President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has fled to Maldives along with his wife and 2 security officers. And Wickremesinghe will be the caretaker president.
ආණ්ඩුක්‍රම ව්‍යවස්ථාවේ 37 එක වගන්තියේ යටතේ අතිගරු ජනාධිපති ගෝඨාභය රාජපක්ෂ මහතා දිවයිනෙන් බැහැරව සිටින බැවින් එම දුහුරේ කටයුතු රාජකාරී ආවරණය කිරීම සඳහා අග්‍රාමාත්‍ය රනිල් වික්‍රමසිංහ මැතිතුමා පත් කළ බව මට දන්වා සිටියා.
Within minutes, the protesters were back on the streets and came face to face with the cops, demanding the resignation of caretaker PM Ranil Wickremesinghe. The sea of protesters broke through a barricade despite tear gas and stormed inside the Prime Minister's office. Police even used water cannons to prevent crowds from overrunning Wickremesinghe's office. But the protesters were in no mood to relent, and within minutes were seen on the top of the building demanding the PM's resignation. Ugly scenes followed, with the police firing tear gas and cracking on the protesters. Sri Lankan police personnel also fired gunshots in the air to disperse protesters as the agitation escalated. Amid the violent protests, emergency was imposed in the country and the Sri Lankan Air Force began aerial patrolling. Helicopters were seen flying low near the protest site. The protesters also broke into the main state television station and briefly took over broadcasts, following which the transmission was cut off. With the political leadership being practically ineffective and the island nation being in complete turmoil, the big question remains: what's the way forward for Sri Lanka?
What we're going to do right now is to take you through the 5 most defining images that have come out of the island nation just in the last 6 to 8 hours. First, the moment when tens of thousands of these Aragalaya peaceful protesters, they stormed into the Prime Minister's office. You can see them occupying that entire building, including from the balcony that overlooks the beautiful Galle Face, as it were. Tens of thousands of them laid siege to this building and then occupied the Prime Minister's office. The second one is the moment when thousands of protesters stormed into the office, or tried to storm into the office, and tear gas shells and water cannons were used on them by the police. Remember, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the incumbent president, had fled in the early hours of the morning. He made Ranil Wickremesinghe the acting president, but that did not go down well with the protesters. Many had been injured. Like I said, water cannons and tear gas being used against them. Remember, they've been protesting for months now. Also, the third visual that we got, police using tear gas, trying to disperse the crowds, disperse the protesters. The revolt closes in now on the 100-day mark. All of these were images from around noon to 1 o'clock outside the official the office of the Prime Minister, as it were. Also, visual number 4 that we're going to bring up, what you see is Rupavaini, the Sri Lankan state television, the national television network, going off air. It suspended both live as well as recorded broadcasts after protesters surrounded the premises of the building. The state-run ITN also went off air because one of the protesters managed to get on air and speak to the people, speak to the nation. And finally, the 5th visual of the day, the visual of Air Force choppers, Sri Lanka Air Force choppers flying very dangerously low over the protest site right outside the presidential secretariat in Colombo. Remember, Sri Lanka's Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe has told the army to do whatever it takes to control the situation. And right now, even as we speak, I want to go across to Purnima Murli, my colleague who's joining us live from these Aragalia protests. I believe the Speaker, Mr. Yappa Abeyewardena, has called for an all-party meeting. What is expected to come out of this all-party meeting, and whatever the result of that meeting, will it be acceptable to the protesters? What is the bare minimum that they see as acceptable to them?
Protesters here say that they don't want Gotabaya Rajapaksa, they don't want Ranil Wickremesinghe. All they want is to ensure that there is an interim government, there is a president nominated among the parliamentarians who are not closely associated with the Rajapaksas or do not have, who are not trying to protect the Rajapaksas, and therefore they want Ranil to step down. They want the parliament to convene. While the short-term measure is to ensure that there is there's an all-party government that's formed. The long term, of course, is to call for elections and have new faces come forward. But that is not happening anytime now, is what protesters say. An all-party meeting is significant because opposition parties are also trying to ensure that Ranil Wickremesinghe is not the acting president, and that the parliament is convened to ensure that there are nominees and front-runners for the top post, so that one of them could be elected as the president. But Sajid Premadasa is disappointed because he feels that Speaker 2 is related or closely associated and linked with Gotabaya Rajapaksa. We'll have to wait and see if they come to a consensus on what the future holds for Sri Lanka. In the next 1 hour, there will be more clarity. But you can see, these are the visuals that you can see right here at the golf face, where protesters are trying to run away from the golf face. We'll have to wait for more clarity on what is happening. But, are you okay with the other parliamentarians, the opposition parties trying to form the government in the interim? And
Actually, I am not happy with all, the 98% people, but there is a... I am believing this Andhra Kumara Disanayaka will do something. He has the ability and power.
Till President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, till Ranil Wickremesinghe, the acting president, till both resign, will protests here continue?
Yeah, definitely. We will protest until both of them, resigning both of them. Until then, we have to be here.
The Speaker has now called for an all-party meeting. Is it time for all the parties to come forward and ensure that they form an interim government? Is that something that you would be okay with, the protesters here?
Yeah, the situation is really for this one. All parties get together and do something to eradicate this problem. Because still not Rajapaksas resigned from this post. And we are waiting, all parties get together and do
Decide on
something.
what's next for Sri Lanka.
Yeah. Decide, yeah.
So,